Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and happy Halloween! I hope you guys are having a very safe, happy, spooky day. Today, I am not Theo Thursday, I am Theo Dietz. Yes, my costume is Lydia Dietz from Beetlejuice the Musical. It's kind of more of a cross between the musical and the original movie. I grew up watching Beetlejuice a lot, and so it's really nostalgic, and Beetlejuice the Musical is the only musical I like. I don't know why. Sophia Ann Caruso's performance is just so good. I think that's the reason why I like it so much. So, today I wanted to tell a very spooky and true story about the haunting that took place in my grandparents' house. Before I really start to get into this video, I want to say one thing. If you are triggered or will become upset by the topic of mental health and suicide, be aware that those topics will come up in this video, and I will not care, you will not hurt my feelings if you decide to click off this video right now, because like I said, it will come up. So my grandparents had 3 kids, and their youngest son was my dad. When my dad was a little kid, they bought the house right next door to the house that my grandma grew up in. So that would have been early to mid 80s. And this house was built in 1959, I believe. So when they bought this house and moved in the 80s, it was very small. It was just a ranch style house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a basement. In 1999, they built an addition and they added another living room and 2 more bedrooms and another part to the basement. So, not long after they moved in, they immediately noticed that something just wasn't right about the house. I think at first they really tried to ignore it, but that's easier said than done. It's several days later, so that's why the lighting changed, and also my other green gourd that was on the table beside me rotted, so it's gone. But anyway, my Grandma Thursday, grew up in this house when she was a kid, and her parents owned the property next door. I believe her dad built the property or had something to do with it being built, and the family that lived next door were Mrs. and Mr. Smith, and they lived there when she was, I think, a kid and a teenager, and they may have had children. I don't think so, but I'm not certain. So Grandma Thursday knew of the Smiths. I'm sure she'd seen them, but she didn't know them well. My understanding is that the Smiths just really kept to themselves. They kind of wanted to do their own thing and have their, private life, and they didn't really interact with my grandma's family very much. Well, unfortunately, behind the scenes, Mrs. Smith was really struggling with her mental health. And as you probably already know, back in these days, the 60s and 70s, mental health in general was just not where it is today. People didn't talk about it. It was extremely difficult to get help, which is really sad in this situation. Because one day, Mr. Smith came home from work, most likely, to find that his wife, Mrs. Smith, had hanged herself in the basement, which is really sad. I mean, I can't imagine walking in on something like that, especially your own wife. Just a really horrible, sad situation. So, Mr. Smith, I assume, lived in the house for a little bit longer until he eventually moved out, and then someone else moved in, and then my grandma moved back from out of state and bought the house herself. And I assume that the other people in the house before her were also probably experiencing this too, but I don't know. Maybe they weren't. And when they moved in, that's when the paranormal activity started. The main thing that they noticed about the house that was happening was that something or someone was messing with the thermostat a lot. It'll be super hot all of a sudden or super cold, and they'll look and somebody had, messed with the thermostat, and none of them did. None of them would do something like that. my dad and his siblings were kids. I mean, they weren't messing with it. And it was just crazy, that all of a sudden the thermostat would be set to like 95 degrees or something like that. And this would happen when my grandma was alone in the house too, so she knows that she didn't do it. Another really big thing that happened was one time my grandparents were actually talking about her, Mrs. Smith, and by the way, they somehow knew that this was, Mrs. Smith. This was her spirit that was in the house. I mean, it would make sense based on, what happened to her, but also somehow they just knew. I mean, and this is an example of how they, of course, knew that it was her. One time, my grandparents were in the kitchen and they were talking. And they were talking about her, about Mrs. Smith. And my grandma had this decorative, sort of like wheat bundle on the wall in the kitchen. And so they were, talking about Mrs. Smith. And all of a sudden, that wheat bundle flew off the wall and, like, sort of rubbed against my grandma's face and fell to the floor. And based on the things that my grandma has said, it really seems like Mrs. Smith sort of targeted her. She didn't really like her, or maybe she was trying to warn her or tell her something, because my grandma was kind of like the other woman in the house. That was Mrs. Smith's house, and now my grandma's a woman that was Mrs. Smith's age, and so she kind of, rubbed the weed against her face and was kind of like doing more things to my grandma than really anyone else. Besides the weight incident and all the frequent issues with the thermostat, my dad actually slept in the basement because his room was down there. And he said that pretty often when he was laying in his bed at night, he would hear something like someone whispering right in his ear, but not in a way he could understand. So something just like whispering right in his ear. So that was really scary, and he knew it was her. It was, part of this haunting that was going on. And overall, this whole thing was just a very negative experience for them. It doesn't seem like much, but, when you're in the situation and all this is going on, it wasn't to the point where they, had to move out or like were experiencing crazy things every single day, but it was negative because by what they've said, it seems like the presence of her spirit was very negative, that she had a very negative influence on the energy of the house. I know that when it comes to spirits that linger and stay behind are hit or miss when it comes to whether they are positive or negative. Some people's house may be haunted by, their aunt, and she just kind of looks over them. But it seems like her influence was just not good. That she wasn't happy, that she was angry, and that she was pretty disapproving and just couldn't move on. Which is just really horrible, and just goes to show that whatever she was experiencing, on Earth before she passed was so horrible that she couldn't move on and give up those feelings even after she passed, even after she left. So, a long time later, they've been living in this house for at least 10 years now, and this has just kind of come and gone and just been a thing that they've dealt with. And I forgot to mention, at one point when my dad was in his teens, him and some friends actually went down to the basement where it happened and started playing with the Ouija board, which hopefully you guys know is a horrible idea. You should never play with a Ouija board, even if you think that it's fun or it's a game. I mean, they sell them for kids. Never play with a Ouija board unless you're 100% okay with inviting a spirit to enter your home or latch onto you. Never do it. It's a terrible idea. And maybe they realized that because while they were playing, they just got too scared and left. And they didn't make contact with anything, luckily. It doesn't happen every time. I mean, it's rare enough for a Ouija board to actually do anything. So no, they didn't make contact with anything. But it is possible that it could have angered her or made the situation worse. But anyway, so they experienced this haunting for a while, 10 years at least, until eventually one day my grandma was talking to a friend, and her friend actually gave her the idea that allowed them to banish the spirit. So what they did was they put a whole bunch of sticky notes all over their entire house, and they all said something like, "Mrs. Smith, move on. You're dead. This is not your house anymore. Go to the light." And after a while of that, and just being consistent about the sticky notes and the messages, it actually worked. There were some things that still lingered in the house that I have personally experienced, but for the most part, she was gone. I think that she was mostly able to move on. But this video is already starting to get kind of long, so I think I'll end the story here. Like I said, there were some things that still went on. There were some things that got left behind that I and some other of my family members experienced. But I think I will save that for another video. So if you liked this paranormal story and you think you'd be interested in hearing part 2, please like and subscribe, leave a comment, let me know in the comments down below if you would like to see a part 2. I will say, if I do a part 2, it will be mind-blowing and really strange because it will have to do with children, myself as a child, and my sisters and cousins. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one, and happy Halloween! Bye guys!